The next part of looking at the separation of art and science is looking at stereotypes that perpetuate these separations of disciplines and the way university systems and structures are set up. How does this contribute to even the methodologies that continue the separation? First of all, we're going to see that the idea of art and science is something quite new as two separate disciplines. So if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, there was no example of the word science before 1860s. And the quote there we have is, "We shall use the word science in the sense which the Englishmen so commonly give it, as expressing physical and experimental science to the exclusion of theophysical and metaphysical." The William Whewell, a philosopher and historian of science, who used the word science in his philosophy of inductive sciences of 1840, is actually credited to establishing this term as a separate discipline. The first time it was recorded as an idea, however, was at the Association for the Advanced Science in the early 1830s, and it was proposed as an analogy to the term artist. Yet the two cultures that we talk about or listen to mostly refer to literary humanities and frequently exclude what was originally the analogy to science art. Here are some personalities I would like you to be aware of in relation to this idea of art science and that separation happening. So Goethe, for instance, although he was best known as a poet and playwright, he actually spent many years, from late 1700s until his death, engaged in purely scientific research. His research and ideas spanned from fields like geology, meteorology, osteology, botany, morphology, embryology, and in particular, color and vision. His particular way of doing science is what's interesting to us, because it was really opposite to the mechanistic and reductionist paradigms of his contemporaries, such as Newton. Fundamental to his approach to science was his insistence that a scientist is not a passive observer of an external universe, but rather has an engaged, participatory relationship with nature. And hence, the observer is interacting and influencing the observed. This is something that started getting lost as we moved into the 1800s. What emerged and what we should think about in relation to these separations is the stereotypes. So how do we define the word stereotype? Look again at the dictionary, and we see that it's something conforming to a fixed or general pattern, an often oversimplified or biased mental picture held to characterize the typical individual of a group, a generalization, usually exaggerated or oversimplified. Notice that word is used again. And often offensive, that is used to describe or distinguish a group. Psychologists at one point believed that only bigoted people use stereotypes. That's not true at all. I think we all are using and thinking in terms of stereotype, and much of it is unconscious bias. We all use it. We have this idea of equality and enemy, and these biases are deeply ingrained in us. We know now from psychologists that conscious replies are only half of the story. And even the most progressive person on the surface has no relation or even understanding that he or she, and that's true for all of us, has some prejudices in the unconscious realm. And this was a surprising finding that confirmed many hunches of human behavior. So for a while, we were thinking that only the conservatives or the liberals or the left or right think in certain ways. But now we find that we are all having unconscious negative stereotypes and beliefs in us. Divisions of people and disciplines inevitably lead to creation of stereotypes that contribute to perpetuating the separation, whether intentional or not. The education system as we know it is set up to develop these roles. If one is successful in understanding the archetypal image that is being summoned and shapes him or herself accordingly, it strengthens the possibility of success in a particular field. The problem is that gender and race cannot be shape-shifted. So we have large segments of creative population not fitting into established stereotypes of the art, humanities, or science worlds. So let's take a look at the stereotypes we're so familiar with from popular cultures. We have the mad artist and the mad scientist at the top of the list. One may say that right from the outset, artists and scientists remain connected in the social sphere, even if separated by methodologies and disciplines. For instance, famous examples in the 20th century, Einstein and Picasso. They're examples of artists who have successfully achieved the archetypal image and even ingrained themselves in the iconic stereotype. For instance, Marilyn Monroe, the female archetype that plays this part. In other words, if you have the physical characteristic to be able to play a part that feeds into the existing stereotype, you're at the outset in a favorable position in the playing field of that particular discipline. This could be said for practically every discipline, but here we're just going to focus on artists and scientists for the class and the roles they play. So a classic stereotypical image that we have of a mad scientist emerged also from a celebrated survey of almost 5,000 school children conducted around Montreal 40 years ago by David Chambers. He asked children to draw a scientist without hesitation, without thinking. And after studying the results, concluded that the stereotypical crazed boffin took hold sometime between nursery and the age of 10 already. He found the same image of the scientist as the one revealed in the questionnaire that was based on a survey by Margaret Mead in the 50s. The popular stereotype has changed little since the beginning of the 20th century, save in a few details. There was a relative decline in the traditional mad scientist image and a rise of a new sanitized professional image of still a little bit of an eccentric scientist. There's an increasing emphasis on secrecy, warfare, government science, and the kind of lab-coded authority that you see in printed and televised advertisements designed to sell products or enhance prestige. And you see these kind of images repeatedly in movies and television shows, in many different advertisements as well. What is the stereotype of the artist? What do you think of an artist? When you think of an artist, do you think of a woman working in a group? Or do you think of a man that's kind of a suffering artist working by himself with very little money? And what do you see these stereotypes sharing? How do you see it informing your own thinking about art and science? Now, we have looked at these stereotypes, but we should also notice that there's a new female scientist superhero emerging in popular culture. And this is something that should be noted as an interesting development in our collective consciousness in relation to scientists. So if you look at a film such as the Hollywood film Contact, you have the female scientist hero. Jodie Foster plays the film's protagonist, Dr. Ellie Arroway, a SETI scientist who finds strong evidence of extraterrestrial life and is chosen to make the first contact. Dr. Susan Calvin is a character in many short stories. She's the chief robo-psychologist at US Robots and Mechanical Men, Inc. And typically, Asimov portrays Dr. Calvin as a highly driven woman, focused on her work and divorced from normal emotions. Then we have the famous Lara Croft, which you are probably familiar with from Tomb Raider game series. She is beautiful, intelligent, athletic archaeologist, adventurer, who goes into ancient, hazardous tombs and ruins around the world. It is really important to pay attention to your context and know the history of what we're talking about. So you should be aware of these kind of stereotypes that are also emerging and how it's influencing our perception of art and science. So the idea of stereotypes is directly connected to the thinking about the left and right brain. Are you a left brain person or a right brain person? The idea is that the right brain person interprets information intuitively, visually, creatively, emotionally. Right brain person is an artist. Left brain thinker is more linear. So this kind of theory says that there are left brain people who are list makers, analysts, detailed, methodical, linear classifiers, and the right brain people who are visual, conceptual, imaginative. In physiological terms, the left brain, right brain theory is not very convincing. And most researchers are convinced that it is too simplistic or just plainly wrong. The brain's wiring is far more complex, and you cannot say that a mathematician is left-brained, because if you said that, you would basically say that they're not creative. But mathematics is very creative, as we will see in our next study.